Thank you, and welcome. Welcome again to our third evening of investigating the human body and how it heals, having a look at some specifics and maybe some specific things that need to be applied to the body to bring about healing, because it is an undisputable fact that the human body was designed to heal itself. And so if it's not working well, we need to put the detective hat on and find out why. Because the body will heal itself if you give it the right conditions. And if it's not working well, we need to find out why. Because there's always a reason. Nothing happens without a reason. So what we're going to be looking at in our first class tonight is eczema and allergies and their relationship to the gut, because the whole body is connected. You cannot cut one part of the body off from another, because the same blood that runs through my toes runs through my head. The same blood that feeds the skin. And as we looked at, the life of the flesh is in the blood, because the blood carries the oxygen, the blood carries the water, the blood carries the nutrient, the blood carries away waste. And that same blood that is nourishing my skin is also connected to my colon. One of the problems with medicine today, if you've got a skin problem, you go to the skin specialist. If you've got a gut problem, you go to the gut specialist. And if you got a bone problem, you go to the bone specialist. But the fact is, our whole body's connected. So you can't actually just treat one part of the body. You have to treat the whole body, because it's all connected. And that certainly makes sense. So I'd like to begin with a mother who contacts me. Her baby's 6 months old and her baby has eczema. So I immediately put the detective hat on. I want to know why. So my first question is, was the baby vaccinated? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. In fact, I've had some mothers say to me that the baby's skin was perfectly okay until the 4-month vaccines. And then, within a couple of days, the rashes started. Now, you can't do anything about it if it's happened. And that's why I stress to parents today, if you are considering vaccinations, you must investigate. Because unfortunately, so many parents find out the dangers when the baby has already been damaged. So please investigate. Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, you go to her website and she does the best rundown or analysis of what's in those vaccines that I've ever seen. And every parent vaccinates their children because they want the best for their children. There is no doubt about that. So parent, if you are the parent of a baby with eczema and it appeared after the vaccines, you cannot be held accountable for that because you were doing the best you knew. But after this lecture tonight, now you know. Now you know. But investigate. Part of being our own doctors is finding out what is in everything that goes into our body. We need to know what's part of everything that goes into our little ones. And so now the baby's 6 months old and the baby's covered in eczema. And they've been to the doctor and he offers a cortisone cream. And when the cream's applied, the eczema goes away. Is that true? Well, it's actually a total deception. Because a couple of weeks later it comes back. Well, what's that cream done? It's just pushed it further inside the body. No, that is not working. So eczema, like most allergies, and eczema is an allergy, it's an allergy to something. So what are the most common allergens? The most common allergens would be chemicals. An allergy to chemicals. And we could probably cover that broadly and say all environmental poisons. And vaccines contain chemicals. In fact, they even contain neurotoxins. That's why we've got so many children with attention deficit syndrome, hyperactivity, autism, because of the neurotoxins. And not every child will come down with that. And that's why you're the doctor. And you are the doctor for your little ones, because no one knows you like you, and no one knows your little ones like you. So it can be chemicals, and these chemicals can come in many forms. That's why if a baby has eczema, be very careful. All the clothes that you're putting on the baby, it must be natural fibre. And it must be washed in a biodegradable washing detergent, as little as possible. And the nappies that the baby wears must be out of natural fibre. A lot of mothers are going back to the cloth. But I know you can buy nappies made out of starch. So it's just investigating, finding out what is this and what is in this. Now that the chemicals may have caused it, but if it didn't cause it, and if it's something else caused it, the chemicals can absolutely aggravate it and contribute to it. Another contributing factor, it's another environmental poison, not always seen as such, and that is mould. And I've had some mothers tell me that the baby developed eczema after moving into another house. And when we investigated in the house, there was mould in the basement. It was coming up through the vents. Do you know what I found interesting? When the mould's coming to the vents, one member of the family will have eczema, another member of the family will have sinus problems, another member of the family will have asthma. Another member of the family will just be diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. Do you know, these are all names, and those names aren't causes of the disease. They're actually a name given to a result, to a group of symptoms that's the result. The result of what? Well, it's the result of exposure to chemicals, or it could be molds, or it could be certain foods. And we've touched on this already because these are the most common food allergens. One is dairy. Now there's a very big difference as far as the east is from the west between the milk in the supermarket and milk from an organic cow that's raw. Absolutely. In fact, if you were to give a newborn baby calf the milk from the supermarket, that calf dies. That's how different it is. In fact, the current figures are in Australia, 60% of Australians have an intolerance to dairy. But if it was raw and organic, you could bring that down to probably 30. I'm in the 30. I'm a fifth generation Australian, Scottish descent. There's obviously no dairy in my heritage because I had bronchitis as a child. It's not till I was probably in my 20s that I realised that it was an intolerance to milk. My younger sister, she had a severe intolerance, and that was manifested as eczema, and then it went into asthma, very severe. So that some people react more seriously than others. That's why you're the doctor, because there's no one like you. You're a little different. It's like your babies, they're all a little different. I gave birth to 6 babies, they're all very different. My daughter gave birth to twins. Wow, they're like chalk and cheese. Twins, born at the same time, same environment, and yet so very different. There are people who have dairy in their heritage, and they can handle dairy. I'll give you an illustration. I have got a friend, and her husband started an orphanage in Nakuru, Kenya. And they had a lot of orphan babies. And they used to give the babies soy milk. And the babies went well on soy milk, except for the babies from the Zulu tribes. You see, they eat milk, blood and meat. And their babies could not handle the soy milk. And because they were getting thinner and thinner, my girlfriend's husband, he went and bought a cow, started milking the cow, giving that to the baby. Oh, the babies thrived. You see, it's in their heritage. And that's why your heritage does have an effect. It's not everything. Genetics may load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. In fact, what you could do with these little babies, because of their heritage, you could give them all dairy, and then after a while, half dairy, half soy, and you can little by little train them back into that other form of plant milk. So one of the big problems with dairy is it's not in everyone's heritage, and the other problem is milk's for babies. People say to me, "What milk do you drink, Barbara?" I say, "I'm weaned, I eat food." And when my babies had a full set of teeth and were eating food, that's when they started to wean off the breast. There was no need for milk, they had food. Cow's milk is excellent milk for baby cows. But if someone has an intolerance to dairy, it can be manifested in several forms. And the two most common are eczema and also asthma. They're two very common results of an intolerance to dairy. So I had a guest attend our program. She said, "My husband's a fifth generation dairy farmer. We have dairy cows, we give all our kids cow's milk, and they thrive." But she said, "My third son," she said, "it was very quickly revealed at 6 months when we took him off the breast and put him onto the dairy, he was sick. He couldn't handle it." She said he was even having troubles drinking from my milk because I was having it. So they put him on goat's milk and he just thrived. So they've got a whole herd of cows and one goat. And the goat's for this little boy. You see, goat's milk is very similar to human milk. But if a mother is breastfeeding and she's having dairy and her baby's got eczema, she has to stop that dairy because it's a common allergen. Wheat was hybridized in the 1950s. See, the reason why they hybridized the wheat is they wanted to create a plant with a high yield of grain. See, when I was a little girl, the wheat grew this high. But if you notice how high it grows today, it only grows that high. That's the hybridized wheat. See, if they kept it growing that high, the heavy yield of grain causes the stalk to break. So they had to go back to the drawing board. Now they've got a wheat that only grows that high. It's got a thick stem and it holds 6 to 8 times more grain per plant. That's 6 to 8 times more grain per acre. In 1976, Dr. Norman Bourlag got a Nobel Prize for his hybridized wheat. So by the end of the 1970s, that wheat's gone worldwide. So by the 1980s, every bread, every pasta, every cereal, every cake, cookie, donut, all made out of the hybridized wheat. And what you'll discover is if you look at the time frame of allergies like this and also gluten intolerance, and you align that with when the wheat was commonly used, you'll find a clear connection. If you want to explore this in more detail, there's a book called Wheat Belly. It's a bestseller, Wheat Belly, by Dr. William Davis. And he gives the story on what they did to the wheat. In the hybridization of the wheat, it created a protein or a gluten structure that's very, very complex. And because it's so complex, it's very difficult for the gut to break down. Let me show you. So the wheat that God made, this is the wheat story. The wheat that God made is called Enkenhorn. And Enkenhorn wheat had a very fragile protein or gluten structure. Fragile means easy for the gut to break down. And it's estimated, not sure when, but a couple of thousand years ago, Enkenhorn did a wild hybrid with a field grass and came up with the Emma strain of wheat. Now that Emma strain of wheat is not quite as fragile, but it's still fairly fragile. And this Emma wheat was the wheat that was hybridized. So the hybridization of the wheat, it created a very complex protein or gluten structure. Very difficult for the average gut to break down. And on top of that, you put the amount of medication people are taking, especially antibiotics, which is disrupting gut flora, very difficult for the gut to break down. So that's one of the reasons. It's one of the most common allergens. I've got a friend who's in her early 80s now. She's a medical doctor. She retired at about 78. She said, 40 years ago, you never heard of gluten intolerance. 20 years ago, it was starting to become common. Today, if you want to talk about a true pandemic, it would have to be gluten sensitivity, gluten intolerance, or the very extreme would be celiac disease. So a common wheat that you can buy in Europe is spelt. And spelt is a wild hybrid from the Emma, but it's a natural hybrid, so it has retained the fairly fragile structure. And if you make spelt into a sourdough bread, and what the sourdough process does is it breaks down the protein or the gluten in the grain. So the spelt bread, if it's made into sourdough, it brings it back to the almost original fragile structure. And if wheat is made into a sourdough, does it break it down? Oh, yes. It's not near as complex, but it's still much more complicated than the original. And that explains why so many people have gluten intolerance today. And that's why the wheat is on the intolerance side or on the allergy side. If someone doesn't have eczema or psoriasis is probably what you'd consider the adult form of eczema. If you don't have that, you can probably eat a little bit of wheat now and then. But I suggest people stop it for 2 months. Why 2 months? You can have a slice of wheat, it'll be out of your body in 24 hours, but the effect can remain for up to 2 months. So before you start it, you got to have your cupboard stocked, your freezer stocked, you got to have that food, because we all know what happens when we get hungry. It's just reach for something quick. So you've got to have the cupboard stocked. In fact, it's a good idea for the whole family to do it. It does not hurt. Does not hurt. So the dairy and the wheat, oats. So what's wrong with oats? Oats are high in a plant chemical called lectins. And if lectins get into the blood, they increase inflammation. And when someone's got eczema, psoriasis, and it's red and itchy, that is inflammation. And if they scratch it, guess what? It gets worse. That's why you never scratch. Well, how can you live with it? How can you live with it until it's conquered? And by the way, we've seen so many conquer it. You get a block of ice and you ice it. But when that one's conquered, The other ones, ice it, ice it, ice it, ice it, ice it. You get relief for a couple of hours. Because what I'm showing you today is how you can conquer it. So you might need to do a bit of icing until you conquer it. If someone does not have eczema, do not have allergies, oats are probably fine. But if you've got good gut flora, here we come again to the gut. If you've got a nice strong gut flora, it can disarm the lectins. But until it's conquered, the oats must stop. Peanuts are commonly contaminated with mould. You see, peanuts are a ground legume. They're not a nut. And because they're a ground legume, it's in storage that they mould very, very easily. And that brings us to the mould that can be a contributing factor. Refined sugar is just like adding kerosene to a fire. Let's look at the gut for a moment. And I'd like to show you how the gut plays a role. This is what lines our small intestine. Up the middle of each villi is a lacteal, and the lacteal is part of our lymphatic system. All through the villi is a blood capillary network. Anything that goes into our gastrointestinal tract is not part of us till it gets broken down and then absorbed into the blood. Then it becomes part of us. But a very important part is what lines the gastrointestinal tract. What lines it is Lactobacillus acidophilus, bifidus bacterium. They're the two permanent bacteria that live in our gastrointestinal tract. And they play a protective role, as we'll see tomorrow when we look at our immune system. Yes, we're going to even go to the gut when we look at our immune system. But what I particularly want to show you here is how they play a role in the food that we eat. They are responsible for the final breakdown of our food, the final release of B vitamins and a few other nutrients. They are responsible for the absorption of our nutrients out of our gut and into our blood. They are responsible for the nourishment of the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. And as I just mentioned, they play a protective role. They protect the blood against any harmful pathogens. The problem today is that this gut flora is breaking down. How would it break down? Antibiotics. Antibiotics, they're killers. Yes, they kill pathogenic bacteria. Yes, they have been responsible for saving the lives of millions and probably still will and will in the future. But the problem today is the overuse of the antibiotics. And the World Health Organization have a plaque in every doctor's surgery in Australia. It says the World Health Organization's biggest health concern today is the overuse of antibiotics. After my first experience with my daughter, 4 courses of antibiotics, and the earache keeps coming back, that's what began my journey in discovery of natural remedies. I've got some good news. So I raised 7 more children, no antibiotics, and they're still all alive. Got that? They're still all alive, and I have 26 grandchildren, and they're all still alive without antibiotics. Because the first meeting I gave you here, I showed you how to nip it in the bud. They stand on a rusty dial. A rusty barbed wire scratches them. They've got a splinter in their foot. And it starts to pus. As you'll find out tomorrow when we look at our immune system, it's just your white blood cells doing their job, but your body needs help. And that's where the alternating hot and cold, contrast baths, that's where the grated potato poultice, then you don't need the antibiotics. And I have to tell you, the doctors are happy because they can hardly keep up the pace in the people that are coming in. And one of my friends is an emergency nurse. He said to me, sometimes, this is not every single night, but he said sometimes 90% of the people that come to surgery are unnecessary. That's why they leave them there, because they're not life-threatening, and after 24 hours they hope they'll just go home. Because it's not life-threatening. And I believe antibiotics should be kept for life-threatening. And if everyone knew what you're learning here and what's contained in my book Sustain Me, if everyone knew that, then I'd like to suggest that most people would go through their life never having antibiotics. But the problem today is the overuse of antibiotics. And antibiotics kill. Yes, they'll kill the pathogenic bacteria, but guess what else they'll kill? They'll come in and they'll still start killing off your bacteria, the good guys. They don't decipher. They just come in and kill. And what we've got in these areas, we've now lost the ability to properly break down the last nutrients in our food. We've actually lost the ability to properly absorb. The cells that are lining that area aren't getting any nourishment and they can start breaking down, and we've now lost our protection. And this is where the gut plays a role in allergies. If you have good gut flora and you haven't cooked your food properly, if you cook your food properly, it breaks down the lectins. If you put your grains into flour and put them through the sourdough process of making bread, it'll disarm the lectins. If you soak, rinse, pressure cook or slow cook your legumes, you disarm the lectins. If you take the seeds and the skins out of the tomatoes and the eggplants and the capsicum or bell pepper, I'm not sure what you call it, you take the lectins away. There's a book called Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon, and she looks at all the old ways of preparing food. And guess what the old traditional ways of preparing food did? Disarm the lectins. So we've got to go back to the old ways, the correct ways of preparing food, and ensure we've got good gut flora. How to ensure we've got good gut flora? Include cultured foods with your meal. I had a very nice lunch today. We call it sauerkraut. Cultured cabbage. Yeah, that's a great way to start replacing your gut flora, because the cultured cabbage is made under the action of lactobacillus. Also yogurts, kefirs, miso. There's a lot of cultured foods, but anyone that has had antibiotics, they really need to take a probiotic 3/4 of an hour before breakfast every day for 2 months to start replacing that gut flora. And what it does it in a very nice way. When you put that probiotics into your food, it starts to restore gut flora. But what feeds the probiotics is prebiotics. What are prebiotics? Prebiotics feed the probiotics. And prebiotics basically come from fibre. And that's why it is so important to eat fibre. We should be eating 7 different types of fibre every meal. So I'm going to count my fibre at breakfast this morning. I had a persimmon, I had an apple, I had Brazil nut, I had almond, I had chia seed, I had spelt sourdough bread, I had avocado. 7. Try and have at least 7 different fibres every meal. And if you were to eat 7 different types of apple, do you know you'd get 7 different types of fibre? And those 7 different types of fibre would feed 7 different probiotics. That's why variety in fibre, variety in your fruits and vegetables is so important. You know the old saying, variety is the spice of life. And I think that saying was made before they even knew what I've just told you, which is the more variety in your fibre, the more you're going to feed your probiotics, which, as you can see, are a very important part of the gut working well and a very important part of protection. And we'll explore that in more detail when we look at the immune system, when we look at that tomorrow. So what are the alternatives to this? The alternatives to dairy can be organic soy milk, can be goat's milk, can be almond milk. But again, when you've got a good set of teeth, you really no need for milk anymore. And a good alternative to wheat is spelt sourdough. And a great alternative to oats can be a millet porridge, can be a rice porridge, can be a buckwheat porridge. So there's a whole lot of alternatives there. A great alternative to peanut butter is almond butter, cashew butter, and honey, maple syrup. They're excellent alternatives to the sugars. So it's not hard to have alternatives today. So the mother that rang me up, whose baby was covered in eczema, 6 months old, I said to her, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you what I would do. I would not give my child any more of those childhood vaccinations because it's obvious that this has been a contributing factor. But you and your husband need to be united on this. Go and Google Dr. Sherry Tempe and have a good look at what's in them. Not many parents will consider vaccines when they look at what is in the vaccines. The next step is to eliminate all of those foods. Now, a 6-month-old baby is not eating food. Well, they shouldn't eat food. Babies should not eat food until they can sit. That's about 7 months. They can feed themselves, and they've got teeth. Common sense isn't very common today, is it? I told you a Bible verse, put not your trust in princes, Psalm 146 verse 3. Who are the princes, the authorities in the field? Do you know what the princes are telling young mothers today? You've got to feed your baby. You've got to feed your baby food at 6 months of age. They can't even sit, they haven't even got any teeth. Doesn't make any sense. You see, in the first 6 months, breast milk has a lot of iron. In the second 6 months, it doesn't have as much iron. So the princes, the authorities in the field, have come along and said, breast milk is not good enough in the second 6 months. I have a question. Has God made a mistake? God does not make mistakes. And that milk is perfect for that baby at every single age. There's no other milk that does that. But let's have a look at the moment. Let's have a look at the growth of a baby in the first 6 months. They literally explode. Compared to the growth of a baby in the second 6 months, of course they're still growing, but not quite as exponentially. In other words, it's not rocket science. The baby's need for iron in the first 6 months is greater than the baby's need for iron in the second 6 months. Let's go for history now. Let's go back 1,000 years. Do you know babies were not fed food? They were not fed food. They were not fed food. See, they didn't have blenders. They didn't have kitchen whizzes. Babies were not fed food until their second, sometimes third year of life. And out of that generation came the Galileos, the Rembrandts, the Mozarts, the Einsteins. They did not suffer. Got that? And yet what mothers are told, your baby will not develop mentally, physically, unless you give the baby food. And why does the mother consider it? Fear. And what did God say? In 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, he said, I've not given you the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. What's power? Knowledge is power. In my book, Sustain Me, I've got a section called What Shall I Feed My Baby? Where I go into detail in this, and I show that there are no enzymes in the mouth to break down starch until the molars are through. When do the molars come through? Anywhere between 14 and 22 months of age. So giving a 6-month-old baby starch, pure starch, and that's what they tell the mother to do, rice cereal, it defies reason. Haven't they studied anatomy and physiology? Haven't they studied the relationship between the appearance of our teeth and the digestion in the gut? It appears not. And so if you're told you must feed your baby rice cereal at 6 months, you know what you say? Thank you so much for your opinion. Because that's what it is. It's an opinion. Thank you so much for your opinion. I'm going to seriously consider this. And you leave and you do what sits with your gut, what makes sense with you. My son James was not interested in food until he was 16 months of age. Here's James, 16 months of age, running around, happy, well developed, all these milestones are there, hasn't eaten any food, just breastfed. Just breastfed. And what are you going to do if they're not interested? Force feed them? And yet some babies are more interested. If they are more interested, you just give them a piece of celery. Mind you, they've got to sit. They're going to be able to feed themselves. And I tell you, mothers, it's such freedom. I never made baby food. Because by the time they're sitting, by the time they've got the teeth, by then they can just about feed themselves with a spoon and they can start to eat more food. But they're very social. They want to do what you do. So when you sit them on the chair while you're eating your dinner, you just give them a piece of cucumber. Just give them a piece of celery. They think they're doing what you're doing. They're happy. And by the end of the meal, they might have got through half the cucumber, and little bits of cucumber are all over the tray, and little bits of cucumber are all over the floor, and a few bits go in. See, the first 8 teeth are called milk teeth. So sometimes this can be a contributing factor to eczema, is the gut is actually getting food that it should not have that soon. Yes, there's a little bit of ptyalin in the mouth. Ptyalin is the salivary amylase that breaks down starch, but it doesn't come in larger amounts till the molars are through. What do the molars do? Grind. What do we grind? We grind grain. All the modern anatomy and physiology books do not talk about this. Isn't that interesting? And yet it's just a physiological fact. And it's one of the contributing factors to guts not working well. So I said to the mother with a 6-month-old baby, make sure no food. When the baby can sit, about 7 months, feed themselves, got 1 or 2 teeth, just give them a piece of celery. And I was reading the report of a dentist. He claims that jaws, gums and teeth aren't developing properly because people eat too much soft food. It's time to eat crunchy food. Apples, carrots, crunch, crunch, crunch. Work those teeth, work those gums, work those jaws. But when a baby's given slop, and I'm sorry, that's all I can call it, they don't have to chew. They don't have to chew. They don't have to work at all. So I said to the mother, these foods must stop if you want your body, your baby to conquer eczema. After 1 month, she contacted me with a photo of the baby, still eczema. And she said, I haven't eaten any of that for 1 month. I said, it can take 2 months to get it out of your body, the effect of it. Yes, you can eat it, it'll be out of your body in 24 hours, but the effect remains, because we're made up of what we eat, aren't we? She said, well, what'll I do for the itch? I said, ice it. Just play a game with the baby. When you put the ice on, smile, laugh. When you smile and laugh, the baby thinks everything's wonderful. But put it on, have a game with it. Just have a game with it. And then eventually it'll numb it and it'll stop that itch. 2 months, she emailed me with a photograph of her baby, totally clear from eczema. Totally clear. She said, it's totally gone. She said, it's unbelievable. I said, that's good news. I've seen it many times. And we had a lady attend our program. She said, my grandson covered in eczema. And the mother took the baby to a paediatrician. My babies have actually never seen paediatricians. She took the baby to a paediatrician, and the paediatrician said, stop these foods. Oh, it cheered my heart. There are paediatricians, there are doctors that are having a look and knowing that the drugs aren't working. They mask symptoms, but they never cure. And if a baby is red raw, yes, the cortisone may come in to just calm it down. I certainly acknowledge that. But it will never cure. But at the same time, if the mother does this, if the mother eliminates all that food from her diet, what they have also found that babies born via caesarean section are more prone to eczemas, are more prone to asthmas. Because when the baby's born via caesarean section, they find that the baby has more skin flora in their gut than gut flora. As one 70-year-old obstetrician said, we always thought God made a mistake, putting the birth canal and the anus so close. 50 years ago, if you went in to have a baby, you were given an enema to clear out the colon, because when that baby's born, we don't want anything from that canal going anywhere near this little newborn baby. But you know what he said? We now know it's a perfect design. Because when the birth canal stretches open, so does the other canal next door. And when the air hits the baby's face and the baby goes, what's that air laden with? The bacteria from the next canal. And the baby swallows, and also breast have colostrum in them in the first 3 days. The milk doesn't come in for 3 days. And that colostrum is also rich in microbiome. You see, when we were in our mother's wombs, our gut was sterile, no gut flora. When we were born, we were literally showered with our mother's gut flora. That's why it's so important that the mother not take antibiotics in pregnancy. That if there is an issue, she's got to look at some alternatives. We looked at how garlic's a great alternative. Olive leaf extract's a great alternative. Antibiotics should be kept for life-saving. Life-saving. And yet, unfortunately, it's given for every little bit of when it's unnecessary. Not every doctor will do it, but some will. I believe most doctors are ethical, but the pharmaceutical company is not. And I believe more doctors should be not putting their trust in the princes in the pharmaceutical company. They should take note from the Bible that says, put not your trust in princes. And hasn't Robert Kennedy Jr. blown the whistle? And he's shown they are not testing those vaccines. Those drugs are not tested. They're not tested as they claim because they're a company that's based on deception. And I mention this again because this is one of the big contributing factors to children getting eczema. Yes, there is an inherited factor, but remember, genetics loads the gun and lifestyle pulls the trigger. So my daughter, her husband had eczema all his life, and he finally conquered it by stopping these foods. But unfortunately, they didn't realise they were living in a mouldy house, and it just got out of control. He noticed that every time he stayed somewhere else it had settled down, he'd go back to the house and it'd rise up again. Sometimes it's behind the wall, sometimes you don't see it. And so it got really bad. They moved out of the house as soon as they found that out. But he found how he conquered it. He stopped all grain. So not even wheat alternatives or oat alternatives. What did he live on? A lot of vegetables, very little fruit, lots of legumes, nuts and seeds. He was actually very happy with the diet because he trimmed right down. He had a bit of a tummy, put on more muscle. And remember the 3 essential food groups? The 3 essential food groups are fibre. He was eating lots of vegetables, protein, legumes, nuts and seeds, and great fats. He'd have a good handful of nuts every meal. He was getting lots of that. And he totally conquered the eczema that had been plaguing him for many years. Now it's many years later now, and he can eat everything. He can eat dairy, he can eat wheat, and he can eat oats and peanuts and sometimes sugar. But if he's under a lot of stress, he notices a little bit of itch comes. You know what he does? Immediately stops that. He knows how to conquer it. What's the old saying? Go back to the last place you saw the light. How nice. Do you know what this information is? It's freedom. It's such freedom because you now know how to conquer these conditions in the body. And I've seen many babies that had eczema. I've seen it be conquered by the mother just stopping this. And if the baby's on cow's milk, put the baby over to goat's milk. And hold off feeding them. Hold off feeding them until as late as possible. And if you feed them anything, bit of apple, bit of celery, bit of cucumber, it's so easy. It's so easy. And it takes time. And little by little you get their guts used to it. A mother contacted me, said, Barbara, I'm told I've got to give my baby peanuts at 6 months of age so she doesn't have an allergy to it. I said, well, that defies all reason. That's why it's time to question. It's time to question. And when you realise that if you do medicine, nutrition is an elective subject. Do you know what that means? Some will go through not even studying nutrition. And yet, we're made up from what we eat. The father of medicine himself, Hippocrates, 400 years BC, he said, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. It's just common sense. If the life of the flesh is in the blood is carrying the nutrients. It carries the nutrients which are determined by what we eat and determined by how our gut digests them. So restoring gut function is vital. Eating organic food, chewing very well, preparing it in the best manner, that is all vital. So changing these things can help so much. We had a man come from Saudi Arabia and he had cortisone-induced eczema, diagnosed by a German doctor. He was 40, he'd had it most of his life. For 30 years he's been applying cortisone. And it got to the point where it actually started causing it. And he couldn't stop it because then it'd get out of control. But when he took it, when he applied it, it just sort of stopped the really bad inflammation. And this German doctor said there's only one way around it, you've got to stop it. You go through sheer hell for about 3 months. Because when you stop the cortisone, because what the cortisone does, it just stops your allergic response. So when that stops, then it's live in baths, cover yourself in ice, whatever it takes. After 3 months, he booked into our retreat and the worst was over. And he had little patches, little itchy patches here and there. And the back of his skin was like crocodile skin. They had never heard of how these foods could contribute to it. They went through the detox program, which we're going to go through tomorrow when we look at detoxification, 2 days on juices, steam saunas every afternoon. How'd he go in the steam sauna? You would think going into the steam sauna it'd just flare up. But every 10 minutes you dive into the mountain stream. And that makes it bearable. And then back into the steam, 10 minutes, into the mountain stream for as long as you can handle. By the end of 2 weeks, there was not much difference. And he sat in front of me, he and his wife, and he said, "We're a little disappointed. We've come all this way. We've paid to do 2 weeks at your retreat, and look, it's still there." And I smiled. I said, "I understand your frustration." I said, "It takes 2 months. 2 weeks have gone. 2 weeks have gone." But the wife told me something interesting. She said in Saudi Arabia, there are huge big housing estates to house the workers on the drills out to sea. And because it's so hot, they'll have air conditioning. And what often happens with air conditioners, if they're not serviced properly, mould. Mould can grow. She said the filter on their air conditioner system is supposed to last 3 months, and in 2 weeks it's chocked up. She said my girlfriend in her house, they got into the roof, there was just a layer of mould in the roof. So with this man there was also a mould factor. So they immediately had the air conditioning system fixed. They checked the roof. Their roof was okay. It was just the air conditioning system. And at exactly 6 weeks later, that's 2 months, 6 weeks later, the wife emailed me. She said, "He's totally clear. He's totally clear." They came back to Misty Mountain 1 year later, and his skin was as mine. No crocodile skin on the back of his neck. All the little patches had gone, and they thoroughly enjoyed the week. He said, "My specialist told me I would never be free of this," because he'd had it all his life. He said, "My specialist's children have eczema." That's why I believe God meant for us to be our own doctors. Because what a simple thing that you can try. It doesn't hurt everybody to try stopping these for 2 months. What do you do after 2 months? You do what your body tells you. And if you're feeling pretty good, if your energy levels have gone up, if you're sleeping better, your sinus have cleared, what's your body telling you? This is a good thing. Can you ever eat that? You can, but not while you're conquering it. If after 6 months you have a slice of bread and everything returns, what's your body just told you? A bit longer, please. A bit longer, please. Doesn't mean it's forever. Your body will tell you, for some people it just about is forever, but for some people it's just till you conquered it. That's why you're the doctor. And 6 months later we had another man with exactly the same condition, cortisone-induced eczema. It was eventually feeding the eczema. Drugs never cure. They just change the form and location. But what's also happening, that cortisone in the gastrointestinal tract is doing a similar thing to antibiotics. It's actually wiping out your gut flora. And that's why supporting the gut is a very important part of healing the skin. Because the same blood that goes through the whole body goes through it all. So if there is terrible itch, that's when you apply the ice. But it'll come back itchy in 2 hours. Well, at least you got relief. And in 2 months, it'll be gone. How long will it take? Depends how diligent you are. If you stop after, let's say you do this for a month and have a slice of bread, you're back at square one. You're back at square one again. That's why I say don't start it till you've got the cupboards well stocked. When the cupboards are well stocked and you've got what you can eat, in the back of my book, Self-Heal by Design, there are very nice legume recipes. You can download the Misty Mountain cookbook from officialbarbaro'Neill.com, and it's got wide range. Everything's sugar-free, gluten-free. In fact, none of these foods are in our recipes at all. So you've got a wide range of things that you can do. What some people do is on a Sunday afternoon, they'll do a bit of a cook-up. They'll cook up a whole lot of things and then they'll freeze it in sections. Then they've got something for lunch. It's just a little bit of foresight. Can you detox from the vaccines? As you'll see tomorrow when we look at detoxification, the body's naturally designed to detoxify us, but it must have the right conditions. And what you'll find out tomorrow is part of the conditions come from the 3 essential food groups. So fibre, and what particularly we're looking at in fibre is minerals. Also from the fibre comes the vitamins. Now the vitamins that are particularly important in the detoxification are vitamin B. And this might surprise you and it might not, but it's gut flora that releases B vitamins. So we're coming back to the gut. You cannot go far when assessing illnesses, sicknesses, and proper functioning of the human body before you get to the gut. And Hippocrates said all disease begins in the gut. And that simple illustration that I gave you previously of your little villi that line the small intestine and the microorganisms that cover it, he didn't know that fine detail. Hippocrates just observed. He just observed if the gut was restored, and he didn't have all the testing equipment that we have today. But what he noticed was that when the gut was working well, how do you know the gut's working well if you don't have a test? Well, when you finish going to the toilet, have a little look. We don't usually do that, or maybe we do, and don't tell anyone we do. It should be mid-ground, it should be soft-formed, and it should float. And that tells you that you've got some good microorganisms in there. And 3 intakes of food a day should equal 3 evacuations a day. Another reason why fibre is so important. Not only does it feed your microorganisms in your gut, and not only do different types of fibre feed different types of microorganisms, fibre gently stimulates peristalsis and fibre sweeps the gut. So fibre is very important for quite a few reasons, that insoluble fibre. So the gut needs help, and fibre is one of the best things for that. Also, protein. Our cells are built up from amino acids, which is a breakdown from the protein that we eat. And to be able to access our protein, not only do we need to eat sufficient protein, but we also need to have nice, strong hydrochloric acid. We're getting back to hydrochloric acid. I've never met anyone with too much hydrochloric acid, but I've met many people with not enough. How do you know you've not got enough? Some of the symptoms can be bloating. Another symptom, bloating can also be a symptom of intolerance to wheat. Another symptom of low hydrochloric acid is you feel like you've just eaten your meal, but you ate it 5 hours ago. If someone says to me, I've got a very acid stomach, I say, congratulations, you must be digesting your food very well, because dogs have 10 times the acid that humans do. And look what they eat. They eat things that would kill us. But they get away with it because they've got strong hydrochloric acid. And tomorrow, when we look at the immune system, we will see that the hydrochloric acid is the front line of our immune system coming down into the gastrointestinal tract because it's antimicrobial, antibacterial, antifungal. So not only should we be eating sufficient proteins every meal, but we should also have nice, strong hydrochloric acid that can break down that protein. And the fats. The fats are vital. 50% of the membrane around every cell in the body is fat. Except for the brain cell, it's 70% fat. So one of the first places to suffer on a fat-free diet is the brain. Did you know that the highest cholesterol food on the planet is breast milk? In the first month, babies aren't having heart attacks or strokes, are they? But they must have that fatty, rich food for their brain to develop. Let's go to the latter years of life. And it alarms me that so many 80 and 90-year-olds, they won't touch fat. Because you see, they were of the era in the 1970s, 80s, where the big push came through, stop eating fat, it'll give you heart disease. Well, it didn't reduce heart disease at all, because that's not what causes heart disease. As I touched on yesterday, it's damage to the arterial wall. How does the damage happen? Chemicals damage it. Moles damage it. Most people, after hearing these lectures, go and start looking at all the labels on their clothes. You might have to need a magnifying glass, all the labels, because the most toxic stuff, you need a magnifying glass or a 10-year-old to read it. And they won't be able to read it because you can't even understand it. It's like it's in another language. It's important to know what's going into our body because little by little it is having an effect. What I have just shown you, we have found will also conquer another allergic disease that many people are having today, which is irritable bowel, Crohn's disease, colitis, ulcerative colitis. We've seen people totally heal from that. And we'll touch on that tomorrow also because Crohn's disease is called an autoimmune disease. But God did not design the body to eat itself. Why? Something has happened. Something has happened that causes that reaction in the body. But we have found when these common allergens are ceased, when exposure to chemicals is stopped, when exposure to moles stop, and herbs like slippery elm is the powdered bark of the slippery elm tree. And when slippery elm is taken into the body, little by little, the gut heals. In fact, one man came to our retreat and we were giving him slippery elm. He had bad diarrhea, so we gave it to him every hour. He was walking around with the jar. He said, "I love this." 35 years he's been suffering. Well, he was 35. He's been suffering about 20 years. And within 2 days, his stools were formed. Couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. How quickly his body responded. And none of these foods. He said, "No one ever told me that these foods had anything to do with it." Well, they certainly do. And some people stop them, but after 2 weeks there's no difference, so they go back on them. That's why it's important to know 2 months, 8 weeks, to see the full effect of stopping these foods. 2 other allergy responses from eating these foods is swollen adenoids and swollen tonsils. And I don't agree with cutting adenoids and tonsils out. I would not like to put my 7-year-old child through that operation. Can you imagine how painful that is? Choose your hard. Have you heard that poem? Marriage is hard, divorce is hard, choose your hard. Saving every cent, euro, is hard. Being in debt is hard. Choose your hard. Exercising every day, that can be hard. You've got to get into the discipline of it. Being obese is hard. Choose your hard. Stopping these foods in a child that loves them is hard. But going into surgery and having the tonsils and the adenoids cut out, personally, I think that's a bit harder. And that's why I say if there's one member of the family that is sick with either tonsils or adenoids or asthma or eczema or psoriasis or hay fever, all allergen symptoms, conditions, it wouldn't hurt the whole family to stop that for 2 months. Wouldn't hurt at all. All you have to do before you do it is find your alternatives. Get the cupboards well stocked. Write a cross on the calendar. Right, here we go. Here we go. Let's just see what happens. I'll tell you another incredible side effect. There's a book called Grain Brain by a neurologist named Dr. David Perlmutter. And he quotes psychiatrists who are taking their schizophrenic, bipolar, seriously depressed patients off these foods and getting a 50% success rate. 50% success rate. And in his book, Stop Autism Now, Stop Alzheimer's Now, he found exactly the same thing. And in her book, Gut and Psychology, Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, she's found exactly the same thing. And what does Proverbs say? In the multitude of counsellors, there's safety. And Michael and I have been running health retreats for 27 years, and we find exactly the same thing. Some people say, but that's just antidotal. And you know what my response is? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with antidotal? You tried it, you got relief. That's enough for me. That's enough for me. And the response that we get from mothers whose babies have recovered, people who've recovered, antidotal, I love antidotal. You know what it is? You tried it, you got relief, it worked. It worked. Especially when you realise that so many so-called studies are funded by the pharmaceutical company, or funded by the dairy industry, or funded by the wheat industry, or funded by the sugar industry, and they're all million-dollar industries. What's the outcome going to be? That's why, once again, I believe God designed each one of us to be our own doctor, and your body can tell you what no man can tell you. And one mother said she wanted to be sure, so she took her child to be allergy tested. The child's crying, needles going in them. And you know, all the tests came back that the child didn't have an intolerance to wheat. But you know what the mother noticed? Every time she gave the little one wheat, they'd get diarrhoea and they'd be irritable all day. She stopped the wheat and there's no diarrhoea and the child's not irritable. Do you need a study for that? Do you need a blood test for that? No. God gave us something that is sadly deficient in many today. It's called common sense. Got that? Going with your gut feeling. And remember, God's government is a government of freedom, and freedom is based on free choice. And as Nelson Mandela said, I am the captain of my ship. I am the master of my destiny. I am the one that chooses what I do and what I do not do to my body. The choice is yours. I love choice. And remember what Ecclesiastes chapter 3 says, there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. It's time.